I want to start today by pulling back the curtain a bit on the review process. When I go to review a game, I try my hardest to avoid reading other reviews and seeing too many opinions on Twitter. Normally, this is pretty easy, since a lot of the games I'm reviewing tend to be smaller and ignored by most critics. But in the case of Past Cure, it couldn't be avoided. Between the scathing reviews and a PR meltdown by the developer, I went into Past Cure expecting the worst. What I ended up getting wasn't some fiery train wreck that I would classify as the worst game of the year, but rather a thoroughly mediocre action game that falls short of its target in almost every way. This is the story of Ian, a former soldier who is still suffering the effects of going through years of torture and experimentation. He's a broken character who suffers from debilitating nightmares and lives with his brother at a beachfront safe house. Convinced that his dreams are trying to tell him something, he sets out to unravel a conspiracy and use his powers to take revenge on whoever left him like this. Oh, did I not mention that Ian has superpowers? Yeah, well, after about a half hour of disorienting cinemas, we find out that all of this experimentation has turned our hero into something of a superhero. He's able to slow down time in order to get the upper hand on the guards, as well as astral project in an effort to destroy security cameras and manipulate hard-to-reach keyboards. The only downside is that using these powers will drain Ian's sanity, making it even harder for him to differentiate between what's real and what's just in his head. Now, as somebody who likes both science fiction and superpowers, I was immediately intrigued by the setup. Between Ian's mysterious past, the sanity meter, and those pesky nightmares, I was initially confused why everybody was so down on Past Cure. And then I got into my first shootout, and the hate started to make a lot more sense. To say Past Cure is unfocused would be an understatement. It starts out like a science fiction game, morphs into traditional horror, veers into action, and then tosses in a bunch of stealth missions for good measure. The problem is that it does none of these very well. This is a hodgepodge of perfectly good ideas done horribly wrong. As a third-person shooter, Past Cure has a lot in common with games from about 15 years ago. The moves are largely limited to crouching and sneaking up behind a bad guy for a surprise kill. You can incorporate the astral projection and time manipulation into the combat, but it's not as helpful as you might expect. There's almost nothing to interact with in the stages, and the game doesn't even give you a way to snap to cover. It all just feels terribly dated. This problem is only amplified during the stealth sections, which show off just how bad the computer AI is. These missions go a long way to highlight the boring and predictable level designs, often dragging things out 2 or 3 times longer than they have any right going and repeating the same backgrounds and obstacles every step of the way. It also throws in stealth missions that defy all logic. For example, there's a bit where you're literally hiding from an enemy in a dark room while holding a flashlight. Why not just, I don't know, turn off the flashlight so you don't arouse suspicion? But even if the third-person action and stealth gameplay was handled properly, it wouldn't change the fact that every part of this game feels entirely inconsequential. We keep getting thrown into these big set pieces, but when you get to the end, you realize that none of it really mattered. It's either a dream, or you get knocked out, or something equally unsatisfying, usually unwinding any of the momentum the game had generated up to that point. The whole thing culminates in this horrible boss fight that only works to highlight everything bad about the gameplay. But again, even if the action was better, you would still be left with a horribly unsatisfying story that is both clumsily executed and ultimately pointless. Like so much science fiction, the game has a lot more fun posing the questions than actually answering them. What we're left with feels like a squandered opportunity that should be a teaching tool for everybody involved. We also need to talk about the voice acting, or whatever you'd call it. Look, it's one thing to cast actors with little to no voice work under their belt, but these people don't even sound like they want to be actors. Everybody mumbles their lines so quietly that I had to crank up the volume to dangerous levels. And even then, it's nearly impossible to figure out what Ian's trying to say half the time.
18 months of nightmares, ever since I escaped from that hell. 18 months, relentless, unchanging. And suddenly her. She wanted to take me somewhere. What pulled her away like that?
And you would think that this wouldn't even be an issue since there are subtitles right there on the screen. But this game somehow manages to even get the subtitles wrong. The proper text will pop up long after Ian mumbles it, often at comically inappropriate times. I get it, this may seem like a minor problem, but it's indicative of the greater lack of polish. I mean, the fact that I wasn't all that surprised when an entire part of the background disappeared into nothingness for an extended amount of time is a telling sign. I can't believe I'm saying this, but even with all the technical problems, the terrible writing, the unsatisfying story, and the laughably bad voice acting, I didn't hate Past Cure. I mean, it's far from a good game, but I could see the tiniest glimpse of something interesting hiding in there somewhere. I think the setup is interesting, the cinemas are often well done, and Ian could have been a compelling character. Unfortunately, it squanders the potential and never comes together to become a game you'd actually want to play. Hey, thanks for watching our review. So here's the question of the day. Do developer meltdowns affect your buying decisions? I'm talking about social media meltdowns, like on Twitter or Facebook. But, you know, it could be a proper interview or elsewhere, I suppose. Does this kind of thing change the way you view the game? Let me know in the comments below. In other news, I'm currently hard at work on a bunch of reviews. Okay, no, that's a lie. I'm currently getting ready to binge watch all of Jessica Jones Season 2 in one sitting. We'll be back next week with a review of Yakuza 6 and a bunch of other things. In the meantime, I strongly recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then.